Dr. Lucas Martins has always been passionate about science and the idea of using his knowledge to transform people's lives for the better. After years of research, he finally made a discovery that could revolutionize medicine and biotechnology. He had found a way to manipulate human DNA with such precision that it was possible to eliminate genetic diseases before birth, essentially creating babies without any inherited risk of diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's. The idea of saving millions of lives before they even started excited him. But as early trials began to show extraordinary results, Lucas began to wonder about the true cost of this invention. As the results of his experiments became clearer, Lucas realized that the implications of his discovery went far beyond disease. He began to realize that this technology was not just about correcting genetic defects, but about engineering human beings in ways that had never been possible before. Lucas imagined that with time and refinement, it would be possible to select physical, intellectual, and even behavioral traits in future generations. The idea of creating perfect human beings was both tempting and disturbing. He knew that this line between curing and creating a human being could have irreparable consequences, not only for individuals, but for society as a whole. The ethical dilemma of his discovery was compounded when a major pharmaceutical company became interested in his research. The company offered him a large sum of money and resources to continue the experiments and eventually apply the technology commercially, offering a cure for genetic diseases at a high price. Lucas began to see the power his invention could have, but also the risks. If genetic manipulation became common practice, it could create an even more divisive class society, with an elite made up of genetically enhanced people, while the lower classes would be left on the fringes, unable to afford these improvements. He wondered whether he was creating a utopia, or, in fact, a dystopia. Things got even more difficult when Lucas received an unexpected visit from Anna, his longtime friend and co-worker. Anna was a renowned bioethicist, and upon learning about Lucas's research, she asked him a series of questions that made him doubt his own goals. She questioned the right of a scientist, or any individual, to decide what is perfect or normal for humanity, and raised questions about the rights of future individuals who would be genetically altered without their consent. The conversation with Anna made him confront what he was really doing. No longer just curing diseases, but perhaps creating a new form of genetic discrimination. She challenged him to consider whether he was truly acting for the common good, or whether he was unwittingly creating a weapon that could be used for selfish and harmful purposes. As the pressure mounted, Lucas felt a growing internal conflict. On the one hand, he saw the potential for his discovery to save lives, eradicate inherited diseases, and enable people to live longer, healthier lives. On the other hand, he began to feel uncomfortable with the idea that he, as a scientist, was in a position to rewrite human biology in such a fundamental way. Questions of consent and control began to dominate his thoughts. Lucas knew that his invention could benefit millions of people, but at the same time, he feared that the social and ethical impacts would be devastating. He began to question the true purpose of his research. Was he truly a hero of science, or was he creating something that could destroy the integrity of humanity? What began to seem like a great advance soon became a moral trap. Lucas found himself imagining a future where parents could choose characteristics for their children, as if they were choosing clothes from a catalog, creating a society where genetic diversity would be lost in favor of perfection. He began to see how this could weaken the social fabric and affect human identity, as people would be reduced to their programmed genetic characteristics, with no room for the unpredictability and beauty of imperfections. As Lucas pondered the social impact, he also considered the potential military or corporate uses of the technology. The implications of his invention could be more profound than he realized. Using gene editing to create stronger, smarter, or more loyal soldiers was an idea that could entice governments and corporations to get involved in his research. He was aware that in the wrong hands, this technology could be used for nefarious purposes, such as controlling populations or manipulating genetic traits for economic or political advantage. The idea that he might be contributing to global chaos frightened him deeply. It was when Lucas received an offer from an international organization that he found himself faced with the biggest decision of his life. The organization, with a clear agenda, focused on advancing biotechnology, wanted him to share his discoveries so that they could be applied more widely and quickly in the global marketplace. Lucas found himself at a crossroads. He could either collaborate with the organization, accelerate the cure of countless diseases and save lives, or he could step back and protect humanity from the risks that his invention could exacerbate. He knew that by making this decision, he was not just deciding on a career or a scientific breakthrough, but on the future of human ethics itself. The mounting pressure on Lucas forced him to reevaluate his position. He spent days without sleep, struggling with the idea of sharing his discovery with the world, knowing the consequences it might have. He began to consult with fellow scientists, but found that most were so focused on the prospect of advancement that they did not share his ethical concerns. Some encouraged him to continue, arguing that scientific progress should always move forward, regardless of the risks involved. Others seemed more interested in the financial rewards and the potential for fame his invention might bring. But Lucas knew the dilemma was not simple. Science could save lives, but it could also destroy everything that made humanity unique. During a particularly difficult night, Lucas met with Anna again. She, knowing his dilemma, suggested that he not make a decision alone, but that he seek out more critical voices, more thinkers outside the scientific field. Anna spoke to him about ethics on a grand scale, and the dangers of allowing science to advance without considering the human implications. She warned him about the risk of treating human beings as experiments, of playing with genetics as if it were a toy. The conversation was difficult for Lucas. He felt that he was somehow betraying everything he had learned and believed. His passion for science, for healing, was now in conflict with his own conscience. He had never imagined that something that
seemed so positive could raise so many moral questions. Lucas also began to realize that his work could not be separated from his own personal beliefs about right and wrong. He knew that, as a scientist, he was at the limit of what he could control. The mere fact of being able to modify human genetics was already a great responsibility, but it brought with it absolute power. Where was the limit? What, in fact, was ethical in a science that could change the course of human evolution? He began to question the very pillars that supported his research. If science aimed only at progress, without considering the harm it could cause, wouldn't it be going against the very idea of progress, which should be for the good of all? The situation became even more difficult when he was approached by representatives of a large pharmaceutical company. They were interested not only in Lucas's research to cure diseases, but in using it as a way to create a new generation of individuals who would be more adaptable to the job market. The proposal seemed innocent at first: improve people's quality of life, make children healthier and free from genetic diseases. But as the conversation progressed, Lucas realized that this went beyond medicine. They were talking about creating a new type of human being, tuned for efficiency, for productivity. He was horrified. This was not the vision he had dedicated his life to. This was not what he had worked for, and the implications of this approach seemed far removed from his original idea of cure and protection. Lucas was shocked. He knew that by accepting this kind of collaboration, his discovery could be used for something far beyond medicine. He would have the responsibility of deciding what humanity would do with the power to shape its own biology. This was a true revolution, but it could also be its destruction. Any advance in this direction, if mismanaged, could result in irreparable social disruption. He saw a fork in the road. Either he allowed his invention to be used to improve the lives of a few, but at the risk of manipulating the human essence, or he kept it, blocking a potentially significant advance in global health, but keeping humanity from the brink of extinction. The weight of the decision was overwhelming. At this point, Lucas began to avoid invitations to conferences and debates about his discovery. He no longer wanted to be seen as the great innovator who would solve the world's problems. Instead, he felt like a man who had opened a Pandora's box and was being swallowed up by the very power he had helped create. He could not forget the faces of the patients he could cure, but he also could not ignore the threats that loomed from a society that might use his invention for selfish ends. He began to question his own morality. Was he just being a scientist, or should he also be a guardian of ethics? The answers were not coming easily, and time was running out. As he discussed his situation with Anna, he had an important revelation. The real issue was not whether Lucas's invention was right or wrong, but rather who would control its use. Anna asked him, who decides what is ethical, and who decides what is progress? This made Lucas think deeply about the impact of science on a society without clear regulation. How could he trust government institutions or companies
that only cared about profits and power. He had dedicated his entire life to creating something that could save lives. But the reality of his invention now seemed more like a double-edged sword. Lucas knew that his discovery could not be used without strict oversight, but he also did not know how to ensure that this happened. In a last-ditch effort to find a solution, Lucas sought out ethicists and philosophers to help him understand the limits of science. He read texts by great thinkers about the responsibility of scientists and the impact of their inventions on the collective well-being. But as he did so, he realized that the dilemma had no simple answer. Philosophical theories differed. Some argued that science should follow its natural course, regardless of the consequences, while others argued that ethics should be the driving force behind all discoveries. Deep down, Lucas knew that the answer lay within himself, but he still couldn't see clearly which path to take. The doubt persisted, and his mind increasingly became a battleground between the desire to save lives and the fear of creating an uncontrollable future. Lucas finally made a decision. He would make his discovery known to the world, but under extremely strict conditions. He began working on a security protocol that would include international regulations, requiring governments and international organizations to take responsibility for overseeing the use of his invention. He knew that he could not guarantee that his invention would not be misused, but at least he could ensure that there would be strict controls and a scientific basis for its use. His idea was to create a network of experts who would monitor any application of his discovery, ensuring that it was used only for good. However, he knew that this still left many loopholes for corruption and personal interests. The announcement of the invention caused a huge global impact. Lucas found himself at the center of a storm of opinion, with governments, organizations, and even social movements calling for absolute control or, on the contrary, unrestricted freedom to use the discovery. The media spared no effort in exploring the ethical dilemma of his creation, questioning whether the world was really ready to deal with such a powerful technology. The pressure grew, and with each new day, new concerns arose about the risks that his invention could pose to humanity. Some suggested that it could be used to control the population. Others saw in it an opportunity to eradicate genetic diseases once and for all. But as the public debate progressed, challenges that Lucas had never anticipated also arose. Several corporations began looking for ways to monopolize the technology, offering lucrative contracts and pressing for exclusive access to the invention. Some began suggesting that it be applied to military purposes, creating new types of genetically enhanced soldiers. Lucas's fears became even more palpable. He knew that while his intentions were altruistic, the real implications of his discovery were far from being controlled by simple protocol. How could he prevent selfish and destructive interests from taking advantage of something that, in essence, could save lives? Lucas found himself faced with an even greater dilemma than he had imagined. Would his discovery be more dangerous if kept secret, or if released to the world? As the debate over his invention intensified, Lucas began to feel increasingly lonely. He had lost trust in many of his fellow scientists, who now seemed more concerned with the financial impact of his discovery than with its responsible use. His relationship with Anna, though still strong, began to be tested by constant disagreements over how to handle the situation. Lucas felt that by revealing his invention to the world, he was losing control over something that had been exclusively his. The idea that the future of humanity now depended on the choices made by other scientists, politicians, and corporations began to suffocate him. He wondered, after all, whether he should have kept his invention a secret, as many suggested. What he could not have foreseen was that, even though he tried to maintain the morality of his invention, he was about to lose much more than he imagined. In the days that followed, the world became even more divided over Lucas's invention. Groups of activists began to mobilize, some arguing that the discovery should be destroyed altogether, while others claimed that it represented the salvation of humanity. Lucas, pressured from all sides, was unable to come to terms with the magnitude of his creation. He found himself in a maze of moral dilemmas. What would be worse, allowing his invention to fall into the wrong hands, or destroying it and losing the chance to change the world for the better? He withdrew from his team, becoming more reclusive, fueled by a sense of powerlessness. Society seemed to be on the verge of a scientific revolution, but unsure of the limits of what could be considered ethical. Lucas's dilemma continued to haunt him, and he began to question his own morality. After all, he had created the technology, but who would be responsible for its consequences? He wondered if, in moving forward with his work, he had not opened a Pandora's box that, once opened, could never be closed. The weight of responsibility became unbearable, and he began to fear that, in the end, his invention would not be the salvation, but the beginning of a cataclysm. But as he wrestled with these thoughts, one question lingered in his mind. How far could science go? In its search for truth before crossing the line of ethics and respect for human life,